We begin my top 24 remaining running back rankings. Players who played on Thursday or Friday are not included in these rankings. And so my rankings list is going to be a little bit shorter than it would normally be. And so once again, if you see somebody missing and they fit under that criteria, that's why they're not on this list. We have Jalen Warren, Tank Bigsby, Najee Harris, Brian Robinson Jr., James Conner, Tony Pollard, Rashad White, Ramondre Stevenson, Buck Irving, Jonathan Taylor, and Kenneth Walker III. Steelers running back Jalen Warren has had 4 targets and at least 10 fantasy points in each of the past 2 weeks, and he had 9.5 points the week before that. And so he's starting to establish himself as a very consistent flex option, running back 3, low end running back 2 in general. I think against Cincinnati is going to be needed in this game. I do think he happens to score a touchdown once again, and thus extends his fantasy streak to 3 straight games over 10 fantasy points. Tank Bigsby is playing against Houston this week. They do allow the 8th fewest fantasy points to running backs, but I do think he gets some usage in this game, and I do think he scores a short touchdown, thus salvaging his fantasy day for us in week 13. Najee Harris has had at least 16 carries in each week since week 6. I think he continues his production here against Cincinnati. I don't think he scores a touchdown, but I think he has a decent all-purpose day for us in fantasy. Brian Robinson Jr. has had a little bit of a streaky year from week to week. He started off really strong at the beginning of the season. I do think he scores a touchdown in this game against Tennessee, although they are pretty stingy against running backs, allowing the 12th fewest points to running backs. But Jaden Daniels makes it really hard for them to stack the box, and so I think he is going to salvage his fantasy day with a short yardage touchdown. James Conner is matched up against Minnesota this week. He did score single-digit fantasy points this past week, but prior to that, it had been since week 6 since he failed to score double-digit fantasy points. I do think he sees a lot of work in the passing game and salvages his fantasy day because I don't think he scores a touchdown. Tony Pollard has had at least 4 targets in 5 of the past 6 weeks, which really helps raise his floor and his ceiling, especially when he can't get anything going on the ground. I don't think he's going to have a ton of trouble with his efficiency in this game, but I'm not projecting a touchdown, making him a mid running back 2. Rashad White, in every game he's played since week 5, has had double-digit fantasy points. I think that continues here against Carolina. I think he and Buck Irving are collectively going to absolutely crush the Panthers on the ground, and so I do think he's a mid running back 2 this week. Ramondre Stevenson has had at least 10 fantasy points in 3 of the past 5 weeks, even though he's coming off a poor performance, and he did have 20-plus fantasy points in 2 of the past 5. I'm not projecting 20 points, but I think he's going to be efficient on the ground and in the air. Bucky Irving has had double-digit fantasy points in 5 of the past 6 weeks, and he finished as the running back 3 this past week. I'm not projecting that level of efficiency, even though they're playing the Panthers. I do think he scores a touchdown, though, and has a solid fantasy day for us overall. Jonathan Taylor has had single-digit fantasy points in 3 of the past 5 weeks, including 2 of the past 3. I do think, though, that the New England Patriots are definitely a matchup that he can exploit, and I do think he has over 100 rushing yards with no touchdown. Kenneth Walker has had 5 or more targets in 5 of the 9 games in which he's played this season. I do think they're going to use him a lot in the short area in the passing game, because I don't think he's going to get quite as much going on the ground here against the Jets, but I do think he scores a rushing touchdown, making him a high-end running back 2. If you like what you're seeing and hearing so far, feel free to like and subscribe. It's a free and easy way to support the channel, and I'd really appreciate it. Make sure you check out my quarterback, tight end, and wide receiver rankings as they come out as well. Thanks. Now we have running backs that I think are in that mid to low end RB1 range. We have Aaron Jones, Kyren Williams, Derrick Henry, James Cook, Christian McCaffrey, and Chase Brown. Aaron Jones has had double-digit fantasy points in 5 of his past 6 games. The Arizona Cardinals are middle of the pack when it comes to points allowed against running backs. I do think he scores a touchdown, though, and I think he's actively involved in the receiving game this week. Even though Kyren Williams has been in a bit of a slump in terms of high-end production for us at running back, he has scored double-digit fantasy points in all but 1 game the entire season. I think that continues here against the Saints, and I do think he scores a touchdown, giving him a low-end running back 1 day for us in fantasy. Derrick Henry had scored a touchdown in every single week of the season before this past week, but he still had 140 rushing yards in that game. Is there really anybody that can stop Derrick Henry? I don't think so. I don't think Philadelphia can either. I think he gets a ton of volume in this game, and I do think he scores a touchdown. James Cook has had at least 15 fantasy points in 3 of the past 4 weeks. I don't think that San Francisco is going to be able to really do anything to stop him. I think he's going to be featured heavily in the passing game in what should be an overall high-scoring game between the 2 teams. Christian McCaffrey hasn't really looked like the same guy on the ground in his return from injury. I do think, though, that the Buffalo Bills are definitely a matchup that he should be able to exploit. I think he sees a ton of work in the passing game, and I do think he scores a touchdown. Chase Brown is on fire recently, having at least 19 points in each of the past 3 weeks for us in fantasy. While Pittsburgh's defense is pretty tough against running back scoring, they allow the 10th fewest fantasy points to running backs. And there is the possibility that Khalil Herbert does see potentially more work post-bye for them. I don't think it's really a huge threat to Chase Brown's production. I think he sees a lot of work in the passing game and in the running game. I do think he scores a touchdown and has a solid day for us, even though he's playing the Steelers. Now we have running backs that I think are in that mid to elite RB1 range with a realistic shot at being the RB1 overall this week. We have Hubbard, Hall, Barkley, Robinson, Mixon, and Kamara. So Chuba Hubbard is coming off a 15-point fantasy performance against the Chiefs, who are one of the toughest defense in terms of preventing running back production. The 2 games prior to that, he had at least 20 fantasy points for us. Jonathan Brooks, in his first game this past week, only had 2 rush attempts. Wasn't involved in the passing game either. At this point in time, I don't think Hubbard's role is in any threat. And so against Tampa Bay, I think he's going to absolutely demolish them, and I think he has 2 rushing touchdowns in this game. Breece Hall is coming off a 31-point fantasy performance for us the last time he played. I don't think he's going to have nearly that dominant of a performance here against the Seattle Seahawks, who are in the bottom third of allowing running back production, but I do think he's going to have a solid day. I think he's heavily utilized in the passing game, and I do think he scores a touchdown. Saquon Barkley has had 6 weeks of being a top 3 running back so far for us this season, and a majority of his games he's been a top 10 running back. I don't think anything changes, even though Baltimore's defense is pretty stingy against running back production. I do think he scores again on the ground, and I think he has over 100 total rushing and receiving yards. Bijan Robinson, prior to this past week, had 5 straight weeks of top 10 running back production for us. I do think that continues here, even though the Chargers defense is pretty stingy. I do think he sees a lot of work in the passing game and catches a touchdown for us in fantasy. Joe Mixon is playing against the Jacksonville Jaguars this week. In all but 2 games so far in which he's played this season, he's been a top 10 running back for us. I think that continues here against Jacksonville. They allow the 2nd most points to running backs. I think he's going to have 2 rushing touchdowns and have a fantastic day, winning a lot of people their fantasy matchups. Alvin Kamara is playing against the Rams this week. He's had double-digit fantasy points in all but 1 game this season. I think that continues here against the Rams. I don't think there's anything they're going to be able to do to stop him. I think he's going to see heavy utilization in the passing game, and I do think he scores a rushing touchdown. And so to review, among the remaining running backs left to play after the Thursday and Friday games, running backs that I think are in that high-end to low-end RB2 range, we have Warren, Bigsby, Harris, B-Rob, Connor, Pollard, White, Stevenson, Irving Taylor, and Kenneth Walker III. Running backs that I think are in that mid to low-end RB1 range, but I don't think are likely candidates to be the RB1 this week. We have Aaron Jones, Kyron Williams, Derrick Henry, James Cook, Christian McCaffrey, and Chase Brown. And then running backs that I think are in that mid to elite RB1 range with a realistic shot at being the RB1 this week. We have Hubbard, Hall, Barkley, Robinson, Mixon, and Kamara. All right, so you know the drill. Who do I have too high? Who do I have too low? Let me know below in the comment section and let me know why. And make sure you check out my quarterback, wide receiver, and tight end rankings as they come out. And make sure you give me a follow on X. I'm going to leave that in the description. Thanks.